the heart and soul behind every business. Stories. Welcome to Business Story of the Week, hosted by me, Joshua Laurie. From setbacks to comebacks, from tragedies to triumphs, we inspire entrepreneurs through conversations that matter. Witness the magic that turns dreams into reality. Whether it's your career, business, or life, your success is always one story away. This is Business Story of the Week. And welcome back, folks. Welcome back to Business Story of the Week. I am your host, Joshua, and today's question is: what's it like to juggle tax law by day and inspiring authors by night? Well, we've got quite the tax law man, superhero by day, and like inspiring teacher by night. We have the perfect guest to let us know how that is today in this episode. My co-host joins us. He is a corporate tax attorney, business law professor, frequent speaker, and award-winning author. He has published 10 nonfiction titles on various topics that he feels passionate about, including his most popular book entitled 14 Steps to Self Publishing a Book, which has sold over 5,000 copies to date. Mike earned a bachelor's degree plus two law degrees and currently practicing law in Texas, tax law in Texas. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am pretty happy. I'm pretty glad, to talk about this kind of like a balancing act that Mike is going to be sharing us today. His insight, his advice, his perspective. Mike, thank you for joining our show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Joshua. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic, Mike. I'm always, interested with, I'm I see myself as a one-track mind kind of guy, so I'm always very impressed. And you showing us that it's possible to have a lot of different ventures, especially things that you're passionate about. But but before we really start getting into how you achieve this balancing act, we need every superhero needs their origin stories, right? So, how did Mike Coes start from, going into law, being the tax law man by day, and then inspiring authors or teaching by night? I mean, how did you always know you were going to be a teacher? Did you always know you were going to be an author? Did you always know you were going to be a superhero like type tax law man by morning or by day? What is the story? What is the origin story of Mike Coes?
Great question, Joshua. So let me back up a little bit. So in high
Please.
school, I was trying to decide between being a chef, an auto mechanic, and an
Mhm.
attorney. And I was really racking my brains about those three choices. They're wildly different, right? And
Absolutely.
my parents had the sage advice they gave me. They said, "Look, you can be an attorney by day, and on the weekends you can pretend like you're a chef and grill and you can work on your car under
Okay.
the shade tree. But you can't do the opposite. You can't be a full time chef and then practice law on the side as a sort of a side gig. And the same thing with the uh, being an auto mechanic. You can't be a practicing lawyer part time on the side. So it made sense to go into law, and also that would also afford me a better lifestyle to be able to afford those other things like working on cars and buying machines to work on and so on and so forth. So that was the thing that sort of set me in the right path towards law.
Right.
Then when I got to law school, I never dreamed I'd be a tax attorney. That sounds like the geekiest possible
Wow.
job, right?
Exactly.
um, so I took my first tax law class in law school and fell in love.
Mhm.
I just absolutely loved it. It's a lot of challenging work, but it's also fun. It's based on the tax code, and there's case law and there's regulations, and you can be creative with your arguments and the way you structure transactions and so on and so
Uh-huh.
forth. So it just really intrigued me, and I decided that's what I want to do. And to go down that path, become a professional
Mhm.
tax attorney, you really have to get a second law degree. Not everyone does, but a lot of people do, and that's in tax law. And I did that. So after my regular JD, my first law degree, where you can practice anything, I went to school another year as if I wasn't in debt, student loan debt enough, right? So I go get a second law degree and from Georgetown, and then ever since then I've been a tax attorney, and that's been 27 years now,
Mm-hmm.
and I've really enjoyed that. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know I wanted to be a teacher until maybe during law school. I
Mm-hmm.
took a tutorial class, and they were. I took a few on the side from these teaching assistants that they offered to help you. And then at the end of the semester, they posted a opening for teacher assistant for the next year. And I thought, well, that looked easy. I think I could do that. So I did that first teaching assistant job in law school and fell in love. I thought, oh man, this is awesome. And so I've
Mm-hmm.
always, pretty much since I've always been a lawyer, I've always wanted to also teach. And it took a few years to find an opening, and finally I did at the local community college, Lone Star College. And so I've been an adjunct there where I just teach one night a week, usually business
Wow.
law class, and I've done that for over 20 years. So that's been a real blessing, if you will. And then finally I got into books. That was not until about maybe 10 years ago.
Wow.
And I really want to write about, just my first book was about teaching tips, and it's
Mm-hmm.
right here. It's called Engaging College Students: A Fun and Edgy Guide for Professors. And it
Wow.
took me 4 years to, believe it or not, Joshua, it took 4 years to write that thing,
Wow.
because I'm
Well,
trying to squeeze it in between my day job and then teaching
exactly. I
one
was
night
gonna
a week.
say.
So it's
Mhm.
mostly weekend stuff, and then maybe on my lunch break I'd work in, and I'd work on it in little bits and pieces. Like a couple of months I'd work on it every day, and then I would put it away, and then it would get Christmas time or whatever, and then I'd pick it up a few months later, and so it was like start and stop, start and stop. And the one thing I will say, and if anybody's out there listening to this podcast and they're interested in being an attorney, I'm sorry, an author, here's something that may help you. It helped me, and the tip is
Okay. Please.
go to your social media and post a whatever deadline you have for yourself. I gave myself a year. It was totally arbitrary. I had no idea how to write a book or how long it really
Uh-huh.
takes. But I announce it on social media, and people will keep you honest. They'll hold you accountable. And so a year
Interesting.
from now, it'll pop up in their Facebook feed or whatever they have, and they'll say, "Hey, a year ago, Mike Coe has said he's going to write his first book." And so you can
Uh-huh.
go say,
Uh-huh.
"Hey, Mike, whatever happened to that book? I hadn't heard
Uh-huh.
anything."
Uh-huh.
And
Interesting.
so that helped me, because every year people would remind me and ask me questions. Hey, how's that book come along? So it's a little embarrassing. And finally, by the fourth year, I had it done, and I actually published it. So it was that was kind of how that first book came about. And ever since then, it's been nonstop. I pretty much do one book a year, and it's been about 7.5 years. I guess I have a little more than one book a year, actually, because I've been writing this books for 7.5 years. So it's been an exciting journey.
Wow, that's interesting. And it's very interesting. Of course, every superhero persona needs a community behind them to be inspiring them. And that feels like, like that's the way for every author to keep themselves accountable. And of course, in case of Mike Coas himself, that was your bat signal, I would assume. And like Mike, uh, of course, this is also one thing because no one really goes into the being an attorney and like, oh, I'm gonna be a tax attorney. It's gonna be so exciting. No one really sees it that way. Like, but wow, but you seem to enjoy it now. You said, and you've had an incredibly diverse career path. How do you manage these roles? That's, I think, is the first question, right? How do you manage a demanding role? I imagine as a senior tax counsel by day, and then with your passion for teaching by night and writing books yourselves. Like you said, it took you 4 years to write one of your books. What strategies do you use to stay effective in each area?
Yeah, that's a great question, Joshua. And I'll tell you that the number one secret I can tell you on this, listen carefully,
Hmm.
is I don't watch TV. I haven't seen Netflix. I don't know anything about the news.
There you
I'm
go.
focused, right?
Mhm,
There's no
mhm,
Netflix and chill with me. I'm
mhm.
teasing. I'm being a little facetious. I watch a little
Uh-huh.
TV. I watch a little
Of course,
Netflix.
of course, of course.
But yeah, I don't spend as much time on the TV as I would. I like, everyone likes downtime. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mhm,
But I
mhm.
don't spend as much as maybe some folks. And so that you just got to prioritize your time. And there's things I want to do in life, and Doesn't matter if it's vacations or whatever it
Mhm.
is I'm wanting to do this year. I put it on my calendar, and that's another big secret is I'm very careful about my time, and I try to manage it with the calendar, and I schedule everything out, and I try to plan well in advance.
Mhm.
Every my next book, whatever it is, I try to carefully plan all that and figure out. Okay, here's the goal. I want to have a book by the end of the year, and then
Mhm.
I got to break it up in steps, and I put those on the calendars between now and the end of the year,
Right.
right? And so
Right.
that's kind of how the process is, and you just got to stay motivated and stay on top of everything, and luckily it usually works out. So it has so far anyway.
Well, and that's no easy feat, of course, because like you said, one of the main villains of this story is binging, right? We love our movies. We love, finishing our series in one sitting. And more than that, also, we love doom scrolling. Everybody doom scrolls, I feel. And it's so difficult to get out of that. But at the same time, like you said, if you are prioritizing, like really prioritizing, then you'll know where to put these time. You'll know where this time is going. And I think whenever I say that I'm a one track guy, I probably won't be able to do all these things on the side as well. At the same time, I'm quite aware that what it really takes is some really serious time management. I think for all of us, regardless of what you do, you really just have to manage your time, make sure that this hour is literally just allotted for this, and that's all you get. Then you move on to the next thing. That includes your leisure and your free time, of course. That's
Exactly.
Mike. When it comes to teaching now, of course, you are the senior tax counsel again by day. You love this, but also you are just as passionate with teaching. I almost want to ask you which one you love more, the teaching or the tax man, the attorney man. But you've been recognized for your ability to engage college students. That's literally your book, right? When it comes to complex subjects, especially like business law and corporate tax, um, what are your most effective techniques for keeping students engaged, right? Like, and excited about these topics. Like I said, no one really goes and says like, "Oh, well, I dream to be a tax attorney," right? But
Right.
you stay passionate and you have managed to teach and engage students in the same subjects. How do you do it? What makes you effective?
That's a great question, Joshua. So, in my first book, I kind of walk through all of them. I have like 44 tips, but I'll just give you a couple of the
Please,
big ones.
please. Hmm.
The number one thing I do is I use a lot of humor. So I go in there. I usually teach a night class. So you
All
picture
right.
this:
All right.
the students are they just they ate a greasy meal at the local McDonald's,
Mhm.
and they just want to sit back in the back of the class and close their eyes and take a nap at this point. So
Mhm.
it's really tough to engage them, get their attention. So I start out and I just I make fun of myself. I make fun of them. I just have a lot of fun. I kid around a lot, and I invite them to kid around with me. And so that makes it a fun environment because it's a 3 hour night class and we're
Oh,
talking
of
about
course.
business law,
Mhm.
contracts. I mean, you can't think of a
Mhm.
drier subject. So I make up
Uh,
crazy examples and I try to make it fun. And if you make people laugh, they're going to pay attention. I guarantee they're not going to fall asleep
mhm.
while they're laughing,
Mhm.
right? So I try to use a lot of humor. I also, from the very first class, I memorize everybody's name, their first name, and then I
Mhm.
call on every single person, every single class. I don't let anybody come in and not be
Right.
acknowledged and
Right.
called on that day.
Right.
And
Right.
I have 3 hours. If it's a small class, I'll call on them several times. But that way, they know they
Exactly.
can't fall asleep because I'm going to call on them,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So that's another one. I use what's called the Socratic method, and that's really popular in law school. Socratic
Socratic.
method. Yeah, and
Okay.
it's named after Socrates. I think he used it a lot originally. And the idea is you're not lecturing per se as much as you sort of uh, direct the conversation. You tell the students, here's the four elements of negligence. In my example, I
Okay.
teach
Okay.
negligence as one of the civil
Okay.
torts, the laws that you have to know about. So I'll say, here's the
Okay.
four elements of negligence, and I'll give an example, and I'll call on a student and ask them to apply the elements of negligence to the problem I gave them and have them
Right.
figure out. And they're just thinking on their feet and they're talking it through.
Wow.
And so the Socratic method is me asking them questions and making them think about the problem and the rules and figure it out. And that's kind of like they're teaching themselves, if you will, instead of me
Exactly.
just sitting at the chalkboard and saying, "Here's the formula. Here's
Mm,
an example," and then
mhm.
that's all monotone, dry, boring stuff. It's
Right.
much more engaging if you can get the
Right.
students to apply the rules themselves. So those are
I
sort
see.
of the big ones that I use in my class to keep them awake.
Very interesting because I forgot who said it, but I'm always reminded by you remind me of this quote where a teacher is best measured by what how much he allows his students to learn for themselves. And I always for me, I mean, I love teaching myself, Mike. I think training and teaching are one of my fortes. I specialize in just telling people what to do, but more like asking them or like putting them in a position where they would think and allowing them to grow really in that space. And I subscribe to that principle every time, in that you will do best if I simply gave you all these tools and I gave you that situation for you to thrive in. And the way you talk about it, it almost sounds like a superpower, Mike. It almost sounds like a way for you to again engaging students at night. At business law, not the most exciting, right? But you manage again to to put your passion forward and engage these students. I want to touch up again on another passion of yours. When it comes to self-publishing your books, you've written and self-published 10 non-fiction books with impressive sales. I mean, first of all, self-published with 5,000 sales with one of your book is very, very impressive. I don't think I've had anyone have those sales numbers, especially self-published. What advice would you give to aspiring authors who want to follow in your footsteps and successfully publish their work?
It's a great question, and I attribute my sales to three things. And actually, one of my books is about it's a book marketing guide, but I really do
Hmm.
believe in this. And there's three parts, three-part
Oh,
component,
please.
three-part formula. Sorry, about sales, and that is you need
Please.
an appealing book. In other
Hmm.
words, it's well written for your target audience, right?
Hmm.
Think about the target audience. You're not writing for the whole world. Not everyone's going to like your book, but figure out that small segment of the population that needs or wants, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, doesn't matter. But you're trying to,
Hmm. Hmm.
provide whatever information or entertainment that segment of the population wants, and you want to make
Hmm.
sure when you write the book that it's geared towards them. It satisfies everything they're looking for. And so you have
Right.
this appealing book with a professional looking cover design, and well edited, professionally edited. And so that's the first step. The second step is visibility, and you want to make sure
Hmm.
that the world knows about you. So, Amazon, as we all know, is the biggest, book retailer in the world. There's lots of other
Hmm.
ones, Barnes and Noble, etc.
Yes,
But
yes, yes.
Amazon is the biggest game in town. And if you want to be one of the millions of books that are already on Amazon and you want to add your title, you're not just going to organically reach millions and millions of people. So you got to think, how do I do
Hmm.
that? How do I get my name out there to stand out amongst all the other people? And there's lots of strategies for that. There's things like you can enter your book in book awards so that you can win awards, and then you can call it a book award-winning book. And then there's a bestseller status, and there's certain strategies on that which I won't go into detail here because it takes a little bit of time. But there's a lot of things you can do. You can work on giving out free copies and asking people to consider leaving a review, and so you get
Hmm.
customer reviews and things like that. So there's
Hmm.
strategies to get your name out there, get your book in front of people, and you can want to be on social media, of course. But you want to pick the social media where your target audience hangs out. So it's not just your
Wow.
favorite fun TikTok, I'm going to dance today. You got to think
Right.
about, if all your readers are over 65 years old, TikTok's probably not going to help you much. You want to
Mhm,
be on the
mhm.
right social media, so that's important. So there's a lot of things you can do for about visibility if you play it smart and you get in front of people. You can buy ads. I've had really remarkable success buying Amazon ads for my books, and
Interesting.
for the one that you mentioned, the 14 steps to self publishing a book. This one has
Yes.
sold over 5,000 copies, and I would say about a third of
Wow.
my sales every year has come directly from Amazon ads. So that has
Interesting.
been a really powerful tool for me. And then the last piece of the puzzle, besides an appealing book and visibility, is something called social proof. And that simply is third party approval of your book. It's somebody else that says your book is good as you advertise it, right? So that could
Mhm.
be customer reviews. When Amazon customers buy my book and they go back and they take the time to say, oh, 5 stars, loved it, or 1 star, I hate
Mhm.
it. That is social proof. That is a third party that says something good or bad about your book. And book awards is social proof. You can buy something called editorial reviews, which all the big
Editorial.
traditional publishers buy. And they're different from customer reviews. They go on a certain place on the Amazon page and it says editorial review and it's a paid review, but they're honest. They tell you what they like and dislike about the book. That is
Interesting.
social proof. And there's lots of other examples, but the idea is you need to tell, because people don't want to spend their hard-earned money on somebody like Mike Coas that they've never heard of unless they
Mhm.
get a lot of social proof. They want to know that if they're going to spend the $10 on my book, that they're going to get value out of that.
Of course.
So you have to have all three of those things, and if you're missing even one or two of those, you're not going to get sales no matter how awesome the book is. You really have to work on all three of those pieces of the puzzle, and hopefully you'll have success.
Wow, that's very interesting, and it feels like again, it's a lot of elements coming together, and patience, carefully targeted, but it is definitely possible. You talk about it like how possible it is to find success, find sales as a self-publishing author. Mike, this is more of a tangent and more of a personal question for me, but how differently do you feel it would be for fiction books, for self publishing fiction authors? Do you think it would be entirely different, or how similar would that be, would you say?
Great question. I think there's some similarities and some differences. For example,
Mhm.
when people look for a nonfiction book, especially if it's a guide like my self publishing guide or my book
Mhm.
marketing guide, there's people out there that have a need that needs to be filled, and they're more likely willing to
Yes.
pay whatever reasonable price there is. And so if
Yeah.
they go to Amazon, they're like, man, I wish I could get my manuscript on the screen into a book, and I don't know the steps. They're gonna be more likely to spend those $10 on my book or somebody else's. But
Mhm.
if you have someone that's looking for a fiction, a novel, and they're just looking, hey, I'm bored, I want something to do. Man, there's so much competition, and there's so many different types of stories. There's romance and sci-fi, and just all it runs the gamut, right? And so
Right.
there's so many different choices, and it's really tough to
Mhm.
find somebody. And so there's certain strategies that work really well for fiction. For example, if you write a trilogy, like a 3 book series, some
Mhm.
authors give the first book away, the ebook, for free in hopes that you will hook the reader, that they love the story and the characters, and then
Wow.
they'll pay the full price for volume 2 and 3, etc. So there's
Mhm.
strategies like that to try to get your book out there, your characters, your story.
Mhm.
But there are challenges for sure between both fiction and nonfiction, and as far as the book marketing strategies, yeah, there's some differences and some similarities.
It's very interesting. What the challenge itself of self-publishing isn't is is well documented in itself. Is also quite the challenge in itself. But it's another thing to actually write. It's right. Like writing is already a challenge in itself, and self-publishing and getting to that point of putting yourself out there, putting your books out there. What would be the quickest way, so to speak, that you would utilize and you would share to us today if were to go down the path of wanting to self-publish, and why would I choose to self-publish over the alternative?
Great question. So, and I get this question often actually. When I give a
Mhm.
lot of speeches, 10 or 20
Wow.
a year, and
Hmm.
a lot of them are on self publishing, not all of them, but a lot of them. And
Hmm.
so that question comes up a lot. It's a great question. And the question basically, in my mind, what I'm thinking is, why, and let's start with the last thing you said. Why would I self publish versus
Exactly. Mhm.
traditionally publish?
Mhm.
and they both have pros and cons, right? So if
Mhm.
you're traditionally published, the Penguin, Random House Penguin, companies of the world, if they buy your book, then there's pros and cons, like anything else. And so you might get an advance. And if you're a no name person like Mike Coas, that maybe they would pay me like 10 grand if I'm real lucky. And if you're Oprah Winfrey, right, millions of dollars. So
Yeah.
it depends on the person and the story and the book and all that. So you might get an advance up front, and then if the book sells a lot of copies and what they
Mhm.
call earns out, it earns
Mhm.
enough to pay for your advance. Then
Oh,
going forward, you start getting revenues. Royalties. Sorry,
of
royalties.
course,
So
of
you don't get
course.
royalties until it earns out. But the good news is, if they pay you 10 grand up front advance and it doesn't sell any books, you get to keep the 10 grand. So the
Right.
risk is on the publishing house that does that. So that's a
Okay.
wonderful thing. They're going to do all the steps in my book except for the marketing, quite frankly.
Mhm.
They'll do almost everything in my book about the self publishing process for
Wow.
you. So you don't have to worry about hiring an editor. You don't have to worry about hiring somebody to do the cover design, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
You don't have to
Wow.
get the ISBN number and all those things that have to be done to publish it. They're going to do
Mhm.
that for you. Now, that's all some of the differences. Now, here's some downsides. Number one, when you sell your book, you're essentially giving up the keys to the castle. They can do whatever
Right.
they want with it. They can change the title, change the characters, change the language you use. And so,
Yeah.
some people are not, they've worked for months or maybe years on their project, their story, and they are
Right.
not crazy about letting other people change it, right?
Of
So that's
course.
a
Of course.
negative to consider. Also, another thing that you want to consider is the timing. A lot of
Mhm.
these big publishing houses or even medium presses, they're going to
Mhm.
take months or maybe years before your book comes out because they have a bunch of them in the pipeline, and you're just one of many books in the pipeline. And so you may not come, your book may not come out for a while. If you self-publish, I usually do it in a couple of months. 2, 3 months is pretty typical. I've done 10 of them now, but my
Mhm.
first time, I
Mhm.
think it took me maybe 3 or 4 months tops. It's really not that bad as far as time wise. And I try to spend, I don't know,
Mm.
$1,500 to $2,500 is my budget for each title. And so I
Wow.
try to be
Okay.
reasonable. My first book, I didn't do that. I went way overboard. I spent like
Whoa.
7 grand. Do not
Oh,
do
oh,
that.
oh.
That's
Okay.
huge
Okay.
waste because it makes it hard to get your money back, right? You've invested
Right.
in something, and then you
Of
have to
course.
sell a lot of copies to get your money
Of
back. So that,
course.
and I still trying to get my money back on the first one, but the second one, the self publishing guide, I only spent like $1,500, and I've sold 5,000 copies. So it's paid for itself and then some. It kind of funds the other books that aren't doing as well as
Mhm.
what's happening. But anyway, so getting back to your question, self publishing is faster and you have total control. That's something I really like about
There
self
you go.
publishing. Total
Mhm.
control over everything. If I don't like the cover design, I can pay somebody to change it or whatever. I
Mhm.
don't, if I don't like the editing that I'm getting, the editing advice, I can ignore it or change it or do something different. So I'm not stuck with whatever some traditional publisher tells me. But I don't get
Okay.
an advance up front. Another thing is I do get more royalties for each sale. So if I sell a $10 book, it's a paperback. Maybe
Okay.
I'll get $3.50. It just depends on other variables, how long the book is, if there's color, pictures, and how expensive it is to make it, that sort of thing. But let's just say $10 book, I make $3.50 self-published. If I'm traditionally published and ignoring the advance, because some people get an advance,
Right.
like I mentioned,
Right.
once they earn out the advance, they're only making like, I don't know, 50 cents a book, like something
No
way
way.
less.
No
Yeah, way
way.
less. It's not
Oh
even close
my.
to, yeah. So just keep in mind, if you do happen to self-publish something that sells, I don't know, 100,000 copies, in the long run, you may be better off self-publishing because you're getting to keep all those royalties. You're not sharing it with a traditional publishing house. Now, most
Wow.
books don't sell 100,000 or a million copies, so that's not reality for most people. That
Right.
most books don't even sell 5,000. So I'm really blessed, really lucky in that sense for one of my books, anyway. Um, but anyway, hopefully that answers some of your questions.
Absolutely. No, that's very interesting because I just never imagined. Of course, we all know that authors probably don't make that much as musicians, as much as all the other creative artists, but like 1 cent per book, that is crazy kind of royalties. Like, so you're talking like you have to be you have to sell 10 million books to even make $1 million as an author. regardless if it's like a fiction or a non-fiction, something like that, right? Around those numbers.
Yeah,
But
something really. Yeah, the royalty amount after you earn out the advance, and hopefully you got a really big advance if you sold that many copies. Hopefully
Mhm,
you're already a celebrity or a famous author, and they paid you
mhm,
$10 million up front.
mhm,
But that's not always the case. But hopefully, but yeah, you're right. The royalty piece is going to be small. You get small amounts on each sale. Like I said, it's a $10 book. Maybe you make 50 cents or twenty
mhm.
five cents on $10 book, but that's a paperback. Now,
There
on the
you go.
flip side, for ebooks, I usually make 70%. That's the norm. If you
Right.
sell an ebook on Amazon, you'll make 70% of the price typically, and
Interesting.
that's your royalty. That's a big cut. If
Mhm.
you're a traditionally published ebook, you'll get 25%. That's typically.
Right.
So again, you're going to get more per book if you're self-published versus traditionally published. But traditionally published, they do all the investment on all the, the editing and all that. They pay you in advance. So,
Mhm,
you're kind of ahead of the game already. It doesn't matter about sales as much
mhm,
if you're traditionally published. If you're self published, it's all about the sales because you're never going to see a penny of the money that you invested
mhm.
unless you get the sales. And so, if you're all about sales and you're motivated to do the selling, and a lot of authors don't understand this, they get into the game because they love the idea of writing. And there's
Of
nothing
course.
wrong with that. It's fun to
Mhm.
be creative and do all the writing and just you and the computer and just
Of
knocking
course.
it out. That's the fun part. The
Mhm,
hard part is you got to take off your creative author hat and put on your business hat, and you've got to
mhm,
start thinking about marketing and those three-piece formula I was talking about earlier with the visibility and all that, buying the ads, being active on social media, trying to
mhm,
enter book awards. You just got to constantly stay on top of that, and it's like a part-time job just doing the marketing, separate from
mhm.
the writing. So it's
Absolutely.
it's a lot. It's a lot of time, a lot of energy put into books. Well, too many people make the mistake. Too many newbies. They'll write the book and just assume it's going to take off and sell, and it
Mm,
doesn't, and they get very disappointed. And
of
they're
course.
not willing to put in the time, and the effort, and the money it takes to market because they thinking, "Hey, this is fun to write," and that's true. But if they
Mhm.
really want to build an audience, they've got to put forth the effort to build the audience. It doesn't just
Of
come
course.
organically.
Of course. That's the interesting part and always a hard part, really. Like you said, not just the fun part, but you got to do the grunt work as well that most authors and most creative hats and most creative people might not want to do. To me, it sounds like um, uh, creative freedom over sales. You're kind of always balancing with either I'm self publishing or I'm traditionally publishing. But again, like hopefully, if you're lucky enough to get a big upfront advance and you're on your way to becoming a big author, then that's the way to go. That would be great for every author, every author's dream, so to speak, to be part of huge traditional publishing house. But you've shown us today that self-publishing is possible and might also be a path for a lot of aspiring authors as well. But I love that you touched up on the business side because that is, after all, this show is all about. And again, Mike, thank you for coming on to the show. I'd love to give you this opportunity. Where can we find you? Where can we connect with you? Where can we find copies of your book? Do you probably have like a free chapter and whatnot, and your website? Where can we connect with Mike Coas?
Thank you for asking, Joshua. So
Mhm,
everybody can find me on the web at www.mikecois.com. So it's
mhm,
MikeKoWis.com. So that
mhm.
has all my books, my 10 books, and my 11th one's coming out soon next month. And it has
All
all my
right.
speeches that are coming up. I've done over 100 speeches since I started the author journey like 7.5 years ago. So I do a lot of speeches. A lot of them are free, actually. And some of
Mhm,
them are online like this, and some of them are in person. But you can find all the information about all my books and everything on that website. You can also find my books on Amazon. You can find it at barnesandnoble.com and a lot of other online stores. So
mhm.
that's the best way to find me is probably on my website though, and you'll find all the information there.
Right. Wow. Interesting. Again, ladies and gentlemen, Mike Coas. Go grab his books. Go visit his website. Mike, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Joshua. I had fun.
It's been a pleasure, and the insights have been great. And to all our audience and listeners out there, see you on the next one.
All right, so here's the thing we try to get a little bit better every day, but we can't do it without you. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe below. And if you have any comments, just leave them in the space under.